Your stepmom made your dad kick you out when you turned 18 so she could have more space for her baby. You decided not to go back home after discovering that they took money from your deceased mom's wealthy family. You know, things have been tough with my family lately. When I turned 18 last week, my dad decided it was time for me to leave. My mom passed away when I was really young, and since then my dad has had many girlfriends, but none of those relationships lasted. I hardly ever saw him without a woman around. During the day I had a nanny to take care of me while my dad was at work. When he came back, his girlfriend would usually be with him. After my mom died, my dad stopped talking to her side of the family. I think he didn't want to keep reminding himself of what happened. They didn't ask for visitation rights or try to get me because of that. So it was just me and my dad growing up, but he didn't seem very interested in being a dad. He spent most of his time working or hanging out with his girlfriends. I tried to connect with him, but he didn't show much love or attention. He did the basics for me, but nothing more. So I got used to not expecting much from him. That's how my childhood was, lonely and sad sometimes. Luckily, my grandpa was there for me. He visited often and was like family, but he couldn't take me in because of my dad's decision. My dad was distant but not mean to me when I was younger, so my grandpa couldn't find a strong enough reason to take me away legally. Sometimes I'd visit him, and other times he'd come to see me. But my dad made sure I didn't stay too long, maybe just 3 or 4 days at most. He was very careful about how much time I spent there. I still don't know why he was so strict about it. As I grew up, I wanted to be with my grandpa more because he showed me love and care, unlike my dad who only did the basics. But my dad didn't want me to stay with him longer. Even when I told him how much better my grandpa treated me, he insisted that he's my dad and what he says matters most. My grandpa talked to my dad many times to treat me better, but nothing changed. My dad wouldn't let me move out and live with my grandpa either. Things got even tougher after he met my stepmom, Veronica. Veronica used to live with our neighbor until she and my dad started dating and got married about a year ago. Before Veronica, my dad didn't really seem to mind having me around, but things changed once they got together. Both of them started being really mean to me. From day one, Veronica seemed to have a grudge against me, and I couldn't figure out why. I never did anything to her and always tried to be nice. But she just couldn't stand me. I think it's because I'm my dad's son from his previous marriage, and she didn't like that reminder. Maybe she just didn't need a reason to dislike me. She was just that kind of person. The bottom line is that she hated me, plain and simple. Life became much harder for me after she got together with my dad. She'd treat me terribly whenever we were together, making me do all the chores even though we had a maid, and my dad didn't stop her. It felt like I was Cinderella in my own home once she moved in. On top of everything else, Veronica also made my dad stop giving me money for hanging out with friends, something that was never an issue before. She convinced him that I should get a part-time job to learn about earning my own money instead of relying on him. So I had to find a job to be able to go out and pay for things myself, which was easier than constantly asking my dad for money. It was really tough because Veronica seemed determined to make my life miserable at my dad's house. I couldn't wait to leave for college and get out of there. I told my grandpa about how I was treated after Veronica moved in, and he said he'd talk to my dad and do something. But nothing changed, and I lost hope that my grandpa could help. I talked to him about it, and he'd listen, but that's all that happened. After a while, I accepted that I'd have to deal with my dad and Veronica until I could afford to move out. On my birthday, I was excited to go out with my friends and have a fun time. I'd saved up money for a while to treat myself, but then my dad and Veronica decided to ruin my day with some bad news. They called me in the morning, saying they had something important to talk about. I hoped it might be a good surprise, like them remembering it was my birthday or offering to help with college. But instead, they said I had to leave the house because Veronica was pregnant and they needed my room for the baby. They said they'd thought about it a lot and decided it was best for me to find somewhere else to live. It was a real shock and not the birthday gift I was expecting. I didn't beg or act desperate because I knew it wouldn't change their minds. Veronica told me I was an adult now and should take care of myself, saying this could be a positive change. But to me, it felt like she was just trying to get rid of me. I tried to stay calm and reason with them instead of getting emotional, knowing they wouldn't listen if I cried or yelled. I mentioned that legally they couldn't kick me out without notice, so they'd have to wait a few months until I found somewhere else to live. I wasn't entirely sure about the law, but I hoped it was true. My dad didn't buy my argument and said he had already talked to his lawyer. He doubted I had the money or support to fight them legally, which was true. I suggested paying rent to stay, but Veronica said she didn't want extra people around during her pregnancy, so I had to leave for her peace of mind. I tried asking if I could stay in the basement, but my dad said no. He had a good job, and Veronica had quit hers, so money wasn't the issue. After arguing, I realized they were set on me leaving. As an adult, they could make me go without consequences, so I packed my things and left. I wasn't sure if my grandfather could take me in because he wasn't financially stable. He used to be a high school science teacher but retired and had a gambling problem in the past that messed up his savings. He relied on my dad for support, so I hadn't moved in with him before. But now I had no other choice. My grandfather lived modestly, but I didn't want to burden him. Still, I went to his place and explained what happened with my dad. I'd tried not to worry about this for a year, but deep down, I knew this day would come. I also had to figure out how to pay for college, which was coming up soon. Thinking about it all made me cry. That's when my grandfather said enough was enough, and it was time to do what he should have done a long time ago. I was confused about what was happening, and my grandfather didn't explain much. He went to another room to make a call, and I tried to listen in but couldn't hear much. After a long time, he came out and said I could live with him and not worry about college. I wanted to know more, but he said it wasn't my concern right then and seemed upset, so I didn't ask more questions. He told me to enjoy my birthday with my friends and not to stay home feeling sad. Since things were sorted, I went out and had a good time. I kept my phone silent so my dad wouldn't ruin my evening with calls or texts. I only checked them when I got back to my grandfather's place late at night. It seemed like my dad had a change of heart and started asking me to come back. I didn't respond right away but waited until the next day to tell him I wasn't coming back. I was honest and said I wouldn't return because he hadn't treated me well. I also mentioned that Veronica was even worse, and I couldn't stand the idea of going back to that environment. I reminded him that now that I was an adult, I could choose where to live, and he couldn't force me back after how they kicked me out. I was initially worried about my grandfather, but since he was okay with me staying, I decided not to go back to my dad's place no matter what. After I sent those messages, my dad replied with a long and sad text. He mentioned finding an old photo album of me, which reminded him of promises he made to my mom. He felt like he was letting her down by prioritizing Veronica and the new baby over me. He wanted me to give him another chance and be a better father this time because the news of Veronica's pregnancy made him rethink his actions. He regretted kicking me out and desperately wanted me to come back. I didn't reply to his text because I felt he was trying to manipulate me. It's been a week, and he's been texting me daily, apologizing for how he treated me and reminiscing about good times from my childhood. At first, I thought it was manipulation, but now I'm not sure what to think. I talked to my grandfather about it, and he warned me not to be fooled by my dad's sudden kindness. He seemed upset by how my dad was behaving. I feel a bit bad for my dad because he's trying to be nice now, but I don't want to go back anymore, and I feel guilty about it. Part of me wonders if my dad will really change, but I know deep down that staying away is the right choice. My dad is trying hard to make me come back, even though he knows Veronica won't like it. He's even willing to deal with her anger just to have me back, and that makes me feel like I should give him another chance. He even texted me yesterday, saying he'd beg on his knees if needed. I feel sorry, but I'm not sure if I can trust him yet, so I haven't replied. I've decided not to go back to his house because I don't think he's being sincere. I found out that my dad's been begging me to come back not because he cares about me, but because he needs help maintaining his lifestyle. I talked to my grandfather about how guilty I felt for not wanting to go back despite my dad's pleas. He didn't offer much help before, but this time I needed to talk. After hearing me out, my grandfather got serious and revealed something he couldn't talk about before. He told me that since I was a kid, my dad didn't pay for anything for me. It was all my mom's family supporting me. Now that I've left my dad's house, my grandfather talked to my mom's family, and they agreed that I should live with him because of how I was treated. They were angry at my dad for not speaking up about this situation for years. They insisted that I live with my grandfather. My dad only found out a few days ago after kicking me out and my grandfather telling him everything. My grandfather was the middleman between my mom's family and my dad, passing on the money from my mom's family to him. My dad thought my grandfather was funding everything and never knew about my mom's family's contributions. My grandfather kept it a secret because he knew my dad wouldn't take money from my mom's side. This money allowed me to go to a private school for a long time, something my dad wouldn't have paid for. After my dad married Veronica, he started withholding those funds from me. I had to get a job just to afford basic things like going out or buying new clothes and shoes. It felt bad even though I wasn't deprived of essentials like food. My grandfather kept quiet about this to my mother's side because he feared their reaction. He didn't want them to know that they were the ones funding my upbringing. But after I got kicked out, he decided it was time to speak up for my sake. He revealed the truth to them. I was upset with my grandfather at first for not telling me, but he explained that my mother's family wanted it to be a secret. They didn't want me to know they were paying for everything because they didn't want to meet me, mainly because I resemble my mother too much for their comfort. So the main reason my grandfather kept all of this from me was because of an emotional concern rather than a practical one. I was a bit upset that he didn't stand up to my dad and Veronica about how they treated me. However, he explained that he feared if he spoke up, my mother's family might intervene and take me away, cutting off his contact with me forever. It was an irrational fear, but it troubled him nonetheless. We had a conversation about it, and I'm still processing everything. But now that I know the truth, I won't fall for my dad's attempts to manipulate me. He just wants me back, so my mother's family will keep sending him money, which he'll use for his own benefit. I had a feeling his newfound kindness wasn't genuine anyway. So I'm not too upset about any of this. Update: I blocked my father after learning the truth about why he was so desperate to get me back. It's been a few days since then, and since he couldn't contact me, he started using Veronica's number to text me. She even called me, claiming I was being horrible to my father. I didn't have her number saved, so I accidentally answered the call. As soon as I heard her voice, I wanted to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me, so I stayed on the line. She pretended to cry and said my dad was really upset, and she couldn't bear to see him like this, especially in her condition, as if she had a serious illness. I told her I wasn't interested in speaking to her, so she handed the phone to my dad. He was about to say something, but I cut him off and said he could stop pretending because I knew the truth and wasn't going to fall for it. He claimed not to know what I was talking about, so I suggested he ask my mother's family for an explanation and then hung up. After that, I blocked Veronica's number as well. It felt pretty satisfying to stand up to them, and my grandfather thinks I handled it well. In other news, I talked to my grandfather and told him I really wanted to meet my mother's family, even though I knew it was hard for them to see me because I reminded them of her. But I just had to thank them for everything they did for me. It was a bit challenging, but my grandfather finally convinced them to fly down here and meet me for the first time. I've seen pictures of my mother's family, her parents and her older brother, but meeting them in person will be very different. I don't know what to expect, and there are still a couple of days before I see them, but I'm excited and confident that they'll love me. And even though this is my first time meeting them in person, I know I'll love them too. Update 3. Hey, I'm coming back from my first meeting with my mother's family, and I'm happy to say it went well. My grandfather was with me every step of the way, and I'm glad because I was pretty nervous. My other grandparents turned out to be lovely people, and my uncle was just like me, only a lot older. We all cried a little when we saw each other, which was pretty awkward for the other guests at the restaurant to see, but we didn't care. We were just so happy to meet each other. Once we got over the emotional part of the meeting, they started asking me about my life and interests. I told them everything, and they seemed genuinely interested and cared about me. They also told me not to worry about my college fund because they had it all planned out. I had forgotten to mention this to my grandfather, so it was a huge relief to hear. We had a great time overall, and we plan to meet a couple more times before they fly back home next week. They promised that we'll meet every month, either by having me fly out to them or by them coming to me. I'm really happy about it.